Hi guys, and today's video is about 5 most popular student areas in Leeds. So these are City Centre, Headingley, Hyde Park, Burley and Woodhouse. I'm going to be talking about all the pros and cons, my experiences and opinions about all these different student places. I thought this would be a good video to make just because when I was first thinking of moving to Leeds, and also before starting my second year of uni when I was looking for a student house, I didn't know where to stay and I was trying to find out information about where to stay online. I was doing so much research about this and I struggled to find a lot of different information. I think the only place where I could find some information about this was on the student room website. I think I found a few different forums where people were discussing different places to live in Leeds, but I couldn't find anything on YouTube. In my first year of uni, I was living in city centre, in my second year, Headingley, and now I'm moving back to city centre. But I know Hyde Park, Woodhouse and Burley pretty well, just because a lot of my friends live in all 3 of them areas. I go to all these places quite a lot to see my friends and stuff, so I think I know quite a lot about all 5 of these areas. Enough to talk about, but of course these are all just my personal experiences and my friends' experiences. Living in the city centre has a lot of different pros. City centre is very safe. I never once, living in Marsden, going back home from a night out, going back home at night, just walking out and about in centre and walking towards Marsden, not once I felt in any danger. And it's because it's so busy, it's so lively, very friendly. In general, city centre feels a lot safer than any of the other areas in Leeds that I'm going to be talking about. At least in my personal experience, city centre was a lot safer than any of the other places, just because it was always busy, always full of people. At the same time, if you are looking for somewhere quiet to be, city centre might not be for you. I don't think it's as bad as I imagined. I thought because Leeds is such a huge city, it will be always busy and trafficy, and actually it's not as bad as I thought it would be. Maybe because I was living so close to London, I thought it would be more like Leicester or London, very busy, very trafficy, but no. I think on the weekends, definitely not your best idea to go shopping on the weekend. Food shopping should be fine, but clothes shopping, not the best to go on the weekend because weekends can be quite busy in the centre, but weekdays, I don't think they're that busy. Yes, if you live close to the centre, you will hear cars, and at night you will hear parties. Students party all the time, every single day. Maybe other than Sunday, I think Sunday is the most quiet of all the days. That's nothing that bothered me personally, just because I always have my window closed anyway. I'll never sleep with my window open because I get cold way too easily, so it's not something that bothers me so much. But if you know you like to have your window open, it's not ideal for you to live in the city centre, at least right in the centre, because it will be lively. It's a great place socially if you want to make friends. Very easy to make friends in the city centre. A lot of students choose city centre as their first option for the first year, just because it's very social, so many things to do, and so easy to make new friends, meet new people. A huge con to living in the centre, other than the noise, is the cost. The cost of rent in city centre is significantly higher compared to all these other places that I'm going to be talking about. City centre is a lot more expensive. I would say on average you'll be paying £10 to £20 more per week living in the centre compared to these other places. For me, I think it's £15 more because I'm actually moving back to city centre next year, and I was living in Headingley this year, and actually in my first year of uni I was paying £132 a week for rent, and I was paying only £90 a week including bills in Headingley. I was paying £90 per week in my second year, and I was paying £132 a week in my first year, so that's a huge difference. But on average, if you are talking about student houses, not student accommodation, I would say you should expect to pay maybe about £15 to £20 more per week for living in the centre compared to Hyde Park or Headingley or Burley or Woodhouse. So the cost is a huge factor when it comes to living in the centre. So you have to think about other costs as well. So say the cost of travel. If your uni is in the city centre, then you wouldn't have to worry about travelling to uni, then you would save on that. If you love going out, then you have everything nearby so you can walk to these places. But if you're not a big social person, if your uni is in Headingley for instance, then it might be your best option to stay in Headingley just because it's a lot cheaper than staying in the city centre. I think rent is so overpriced anyway. For someone like me who gets a minimum loan, rent is very expensive. I know it's a lot cheaper than London, and even where I come from Hertfordshire, city centre in Leeds is cheaper than Hertfordshire quite a lot. I still think the price of rent is way too high for students who ultimately just can't afford it. My student loan doesn't even cover a half of my student accommodation. So if you worry about money, if your loan is not so high, then you might want to skip it, but you have to think of other costs as well. I was living in Headingley for a year. I didn't want to stay in Headingley. I had a few house viewings for places in Headingley just because Headingley is so popular and I actually go to Headingley campus. So for me, you would have thought Headingley was my perfect location. My university was less than 10 minutes away, which was very convenient. I also loved the fact it was very studenty. People that I met in their second and third year would either choose to live in Hyde Park or Headingley. Not so many people decided to stay in city centre. Most would either go to Hyde Park or Headingley. All of my housemates actually went to city campus, but we decided to go with Headingley because we had really bad things about Hyde Park, which I'm going to jump onto in a second. But yeah, we had not so nice things about Hyde Park, so that's why we decided to go with Headingley. In the centre of Headingley, you have Arndale Centre, Sainsbury's, Boots, Superdrug, Post Office. Technically, you don't really have to move from Headingley to city centre to get your shopping done unless you want to go clothes shopping. I think for clothes, Headingley was not ideal, but if you needed food or makeup, Headingley was great. There are many bars, so if you wanted to go out for drinks with your housemates or your friends, very easy to walk down to a pub, but no nightclubs. If you had big person on clubbing, which I know a lot of students are, which is why I'm mentioning this, there are no nightclubs in Headingley. Everything in Headingley shuts at about 12:01. And I think for me, I wouldn't mind it so much, but I run a society. I run a society at my university, which means I go out quite a lot. I go out with my society. I organize different events. And if there was a nightclub in Headingley, I would organize these events there. But because there were no nightclubs, I constantly had to go to the city centre. Yes, I saved my money on rent, but then I spent a lot of money on public transport and taxis, especially taxis, to get to city centre because I was in city centre loads. So I'm saying this because sometimes you might look at rent and think, oh, I'm going to go to Headingley just because it's a lot cheaper than the city centre. But if your campus is in the city centre, or you know you're going to be out loads in the centre, or you are part of a society and you want to come to a lot of different events, definitely most societies host their events in city centre, not so many in Headingley. That was one of the main things why I wanted to go back to the centre, but actually not my number one reason. My number one reason was safety. Out of these 5 areas, the worst reputation goes to Hyde Park and Woodhouse. And that's for a good reason, I would say. I'm going to get onto that. However, in Headingley, I used to hate getting taxis on my own. I just don't like it. I had quite bad stories about taxis in Leeds. I don't really believe the stories so much, but I just don't feel comfortable that much. I mean, I do it, but I don't feel comfortable getting taxis on my own, which happened quite a lot when I lived in Headingley. Also, I generally didn't feel safe at night. Up until all the bars shut, which is about 12:01-ish, Headingley feels safe. But after 12/1, everything in Headingley shuts. You don't really see anyone around. Very unlike city centre. Even I would say before 12, some parts of Headingley, because Headingley has so many of them little small streets and roads. So the main road is not as bad, even though after 1 it's also very quiet. It's not as bad as them little streets, whereas I was living on one of them small tiny street, which was great for the day and for the night when you were inside because it felt so quiet. You barely had any cars, any students. It felt very nice and peaceful, but at the same time, at night, I didn't feel safe walking back home, even when it wasn't so late. And that was like a huge thing for me. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Maybe I'm a little extra saying this and maybe you think it's very silly, but during Freshers, I went to a Freshers fair and I was given this rape alarm sort of a thing. And every single time I was walking home or I was walking in Headingley, whether I was coming back from a friend or even when I was walking home from university at night, I had this alarm in my hand just in case something could happen because there was no one around, no one to talk to, so it felt scary. I felt scared living in Headingley sometimes. Even though, yes, everyone says it's a lot nicer than Hyde Park, I do think it's nicer. For me, it's a much nicer place to live than Hyde Park, but I still didn't feel safe. So that's why I decided to go with city centre, and I don't think I'm going to go back to living in Headingley. Even if I was to do masters in Leeds, I wouldn't go back to Headingley. It's very unlikely just because I didn't feel safe. Hyde Park is between Headingley and city centre. It has a really bad reputation. It's very known for burglaries, for assaults. A lot of things happened in Hyde Park and happen every year, and I don't think it's as bad as people claim. I have a lot of friends in Hyde Park who really like to live in Hyde Park, especially for its cheap rent. Out of Headingley, city centre and Hyde Park, which are the three most popular studenty places in Leeds, Hyde Park, you are most likely to get the cheapest rent. Some of my friends really like Hyde Park and they didn't have any bad experiences, but then I had other friends that had their house robbed, that don't feel safe walking home at night, which I certainly agree with. There's this park in Hyde Park and there are no lights, no nothing. I would say Hyde Park is not for the ones who want to go back from a night out, who want to walk back from a night out, for instance. If you always get taxis, should be fine, but don't walk around Hyde Park at night. I don't think it's worth it. Some people say they never had bad experiences, but then my other friends say they had some really sketchy experiences before. So for that reason, I wouldn't recommend Hyde Park myself. I personally also don't like Hyde Park during the day just because there are so many hills. It's like uphill, downhill, uphill, downhill. Hyde Park has so many hills to it. I don't like how it looks. It's not a very appealing place for me to live in. The houses are not very nice look-wise, and I just don't like the whole structure of Hyde Park. I personally wouldn't want to live there ever. I'm going to be completely honest, I don't care about the rent price. I don't like it. If you're a guy watching this, I don't want to be stereotypical, but from my experiences, guys who live in Hyde Park, my friends who are guys, are a lot happier with living in Hyde Park, whereas my friends who are girls, they're not as happy just for the visual aspect of it and for the safety aspect. Hyde Park has Brudenell, which is a great live venue place. It's a great bar, but you can also play pool, you can play snooker, you can watch different gigs in Brudenell, so that's a nice place to go to in Hyde Park. There are some pros of living in Hyde Park, definitely. Feels like it's right in the middle of the studenty area of Leeds, you know. You have many shops in Hyde Park and you should have different bars. Something that's even closer to city centre is Woodhouse. If you live in Woodhouse, you should be closer to University of Leeds than anywhere else, really. See, the thing with Woodhouse, I don't know Woodhouse that well personally because I don't actually have that many friends who live there. But I have two very good friends who live in Woodhouse and they both say don't live there, it's very sketchy. Woodhouse also has a pretty bad reputation for assaults, robbery. If you Google Woodhouse, if you go on the student room, Woodhouse has a pretty bad reputation. Well, not so bad or equally as bad as Hyde Park. So for that reason, again, not a place I would recommend unless you are thinking of living more towards either the main road, the Woodhouse Road or Woodhouse Lane, however that road is called. If you are thinking of living more towards the city centre, sort of on the outskirts of Woodhouse, very close to city centre. Those areas of Woodhouse are very nice and very safe. I know them areas quite well, and I would say it's a very nice place to live. When it's close to city centre, it feels busy. There are many people walking around. You have cameras, you have security, feels great. But if you are thinking of not so much close to the city centre, I wouldn't recommend it. Personally had not so nice things, and it's also not the cleanest apparently. Burley is not a studenty. Burley is the least studenty out of the 5. I see a lot of different families living in Burley, but there are a lot of student houses in Burley as well. There's a train station in Burley, as well as Headingley, which can be very useful, especially if you travel back home a lot. It could be very useful to have a train station nearby. There's also Co-op. Co-op is sort of a main shop in Burley. I think the worst thing about Burley is the fact there's nothing to it. It's not bad in many means, it doesn't look bad. I think visually it's a lot nicer than Hyde Park. I would choose Burley over Hyde Park any time of the day. You don't hear as many bad stories about Burley compared to Hyde Park, but there's not really much to it. Everything is quite far away, so if you want to get to uni, you will either have to walk for like half an hour at least, or you will have to get the bus. If you want to walk to the centre, you will have to walk for either half an hour or get the bus. So if you like walking, Burley could be an ideal location for you. But if you don't like walking, or you don't want to get taxis constantly whenever you're on a night out, then you wouldn't like Burley. There's not really much to it. You don't have as many bars and places around compared to Headingley or Hyde Park. So the social aspect of Burley is not really there. Socially, Burley is not the best. Safety-wise, it's sort of the same deal as Headingley, I would say. So it's not as bad as Hyde Park or Woodhouse. It's on the same level as Headingley. It has a good reputation. You don't hear many bad stories. But because it's so quiet, especially by the stadium, there's this alleyway. And this alleyway is very long. By the stadium, sort of between Headingley and Burley, there's this alleyway through the stadium. And at night it feels very scary. I wouldn't recommend walking through that alleyway at night because it feels very scary and it is quite long. But in general, it's a nice place, not as loud, pretty clean. So it's better in that sense for people who work. But you guys, that's the end about 5 different areas in Leeds where you could live as a student. I hope this video was somewhat helpful to you guys. If you have any more questions, please leave them down below. I could talk even more in depth about all these different places, but this video is so long already. I don't want to make it even longer, but if you have any questions, please leave them down below and I will try to answer them. But yeah, you guys, thank you so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed. If you didn't, please like it and subscribe to me if you're not already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!